All right, yo, it's your boy Yoshi Kid Neo, and we are back with another edition of the DM Diaries. I liked how fast my last DM Diaries went. It was a total of 3 sessions that I covered, and it makes it to where I only have to do the stream or the video recording, whichever ends up happening, once every 3 to 4 weeks, depending on how many sessions we go through. So this one is going to be parts 11, 12, and 13, which is going to be Confess, Sail to Bleakbell, and SHAAKS. So, without further ado, let's go over what the party did in these sessions. So, in Confess, we were pretty much on this map the entire time, and we had, we had these 5 NPCs were the main folks that the party were dealing with. So, essentially, this was the session that began after Lloyd had cast his mending spell to fix the table after Kai here had stabbed his sword into it, and then was told, hey, you're gonna have to fix that. I'm sure Kai was willing to pay, even though he had literally no money, and Lloyd definitely was not thinking. I remember him saying after the session that he didn't have a proper description of the guards, but he also didn't ask for a proper description of the guards. What I did is a technique that I do with these online games that you can think of it how you want, but the way I think of it is I do something in either the chat or I use my soundboard in some way, shape, or form to see if the players themselves are paying attention to what's going on in their surroundings on the tabletop simulator. So what I did for this particular session was I typed out in the chat box of Foundry that as you guys are sitting around drinking and eating your food, a group of guards walks in and they take a seat. They are maybe 10 feet around, or 10 feet away from you rather, and they are all looking around. They seem to be quite relaxed. They're not postured for any type of like investigation, or maybe they're not even on duty. They're just kind of here hanging out. So I typed that in the chat. And I believe that Dr. Thorpe specifically said something, and I believe he said something to Trina. And this was when Kai was starting to go over, and he was talking about like who he was, where he came from, what he's been up to, how he came to be captured by the Chosen of Baphomet, and all this stuff. And then eventually he got to the part where he stood up on the table, drew his sword, and stabbed the table, saying, I'm going to be known as the best monster slayer in the world. And that's when the crowd, literally when he did that, he was shouting at the top of his lungs. Granted, Gerald didn't roleplay that because no one wants to get, their ears blasted out from that. But he was shouting at the top of his lungs. He stabbed this the sword into the table and caused a scene where everybody's like, what's going on? Including the guards that were sitting nearby. So now the guards are looking at this table. They're seeing what exactly is going on. Obviously, there's a kid that's drawn his weapon, and they're just making sure things don't get out of hand. Obviously, you're in a tavern. Sometimes things look innocent, but because of the way alcohol and drugs affect the body and the mind, you never know what could happen. So the guards are postured to intervene if need be. And intervene they did when Lloyd reached over, cast his spell, and mended the table. The guards stood up. They didn't draw their weapons, but they approached the table and they began talking to him, saying that they were going to be detained while they called in for the Inquisition to come and question the arcane user and his friends. They were to remain within the eyesight of the guards at all times, and at this point, the beginning of the session started with them being taken essentially to the end of the docks, which this is probably the middle where I just pinged. It's probably a little bit further down technically in terms of how big this city is. So it's essentially like a U-shape. The central road goes straight up the middle. To the right side is all the civilian and fishing ships and things like that. And to the left side is going to be all the militaristic ships and things like that. And there's a very, very few amount because the Thurian Empire is not really much of a seafaring people. They're not focused on their armada and their fleets, so they've invested minimal resources into it, and instead they have a better land unit, especially because most of their money and their funds go to the Inquisition and the various churches that deal with all the worship of the gods and things like that. So anyway, the party gets taken to the Inquisition's quarters, and they're taken to the 3rd story floor, and they're taken to the very back room. When they're put in there, it's a pretty average looking room, like a waiting area. There's plenty of seating, there's a refreshments table, and there's a bookshelf with some what looks to be like light reading, things like that. And the main thing that the party notices is that there are no windows. So they are literally here being detained, about to be questioned by Gower himself as he arrives in the city. And the party are frantically trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? What's our goal? Because Gower is definitely going to arrest you. And if he arrests you, we all know that anyone that is, friendly with arcane users and don't turn them over to the Empire, they're also going to be thrown in chains. Well, it was at this point that Three-Toed Jim saw that the bookshelf had about 5 different books that were sort of scattered about, but they were all of a bright yellow color. And after studying it for a moment, he pulled them in certain order, and they heard a unlocking sound, which happened to be a small trap door that was hidden under the carpet right underneath that bookshelf. When they saw it, they looked in, and they could see that it went all the way down to below the docks into the sewage system, essentially. And it was at this moment that I decided to trigger Gower coming through. The main reason I did that was now they don't have all the time in the world to discuss what's going to happen. This forces the party to make a decision and not really be able to think things through, think things rationally. And they're all like, oh shit, what do? We literally have like 30 seconds before that dude walks in and starts to interrogate us. And that's when Lloyd's like, you know what? I will leave. I'm the only one that they know for a fact does arcane magic. I will risk myself, and you guys can just say something like I used my spells to manipulate you into doing my bidding. And they're all like, are you sure? And he's like, we don't have time to discuss. And he goes down the trap door, essentially sacrificing himself. A very not Jeff move. I would never assume that Jeff would get rid of, or at least toy with the idea of his character possibly being, destroyed or killed or captured all by his lonesome just to protect the rest of the party. So this was something that I did anticipate someone going down the trap door. But I didn't anticipate Jeff actually going through with it. I thought maybe the entire party would do it. So what happened was the footsteps happened to be Armin, the captain that had brought them to the Inquisition's quarters. And he was like, all right, so Gower just arrived. He'll be here in a moment. And he's like, wait a second. Where is the wizard? And they're all like, oh, yo, who are you? Where are we? We don't know what's going on. First thing we remember is we met this dude on the road, and then now we are like, I know what's going on, but I don't know what's going on. So they all feigned ignorance to who Lloyd was. They all said that he had used his magic to manipulate them and essentially erase their memories, and they had no idea what they were doing or how long they'd been doing it for, which Armin had locked them in this room and started to call on the manhunt for Lloyd. Meanwhile, in the sewer, guess who's there waiting for Lloyd? It's our good buddy Gower here. So Gower anticipated Lloyd or one of them making this move, finding out that the bookshelf opened up a trap door and that they could sneak out of the Inquisition's quarters. And what he told Lloyd was that this is a trap that he uses to essentially make it easier for him to sentence any wizards. Because if they have been captured for some sort of interrogation or questioning and they try to escape, they're trying to hide something. And that's how the Inquisition sees it. and they don't have to ask any other questions beyond that. So Gower gives Lloyd a choice. Lloyd can fight them right here and now, and it'd be 2-on-1. It'd be Gower and his plate mail buddy here, who they don't know his name, they don't know what he's capable of, but they would Lloyd would have to fight both of them on his own, which he'd be able to escape most likely. If he used his magic the way that I anticipate that he would probably use his spells that give him make it harder for him to get hit, as well as teleporting and stuff like that, just to get out of there. But then he's a wanted man, so he could either fight them right then and there, and they would end his suffering quickly if he did that. He could chain himself up and be taken to the Inquisition judges, the High Judge, to be sentenced to whatever they deem necessary of a arcane and user, especially one that's unregistered. Lloyd is not registered as an arcane user, neither is the rest of the party, but we'll get to that in a second. Or Gower's favorite option is that Lloyd could go and leave as he intended to, but now Gower would be able to get a warrant for his arrest and or death upon his visitation to the High Judge, saying that Lloyd resisted arrest and got away. The judge would have no issue ordering his immediate capture and or death. And Lloyd asked some questions and got some of the answers that he needed to possibly do some research to figure out like what exactly is the Inquisition's main goals. He knows that Gower specifically worships Mystra, and his whole goal is to wipe clean the arcane users from the world. And he's starting with the Thurian Empire, but who knows what'll happen once he's able to accomplish his goals in the name of Mystra. And from Lloyd, he did a religion check, I believe, and got high enough to know that Mystra is the goddess of all magic, divine and arcane, nature, all of it. So Lloyd knows that the Inquisition is twisting the words of Mystra, twisting her tenets to essentially fit their own goals. So it's not right, but he doesn't have the capabilities, at least not yet, not unless he tries to figure it out or tries to look for a way. He doesn't have the capabilities to overthrow the Inquisition. But if that's something that Lloyd would want to do, that is certainly something that Lloyd and the party could do. They could attempt to overthrow the Inquisition as a organization and either replace the leaders so that they could do Mystra's actual will, or try to wipe out the Inquisition and possibly the Empire altogether. Who knows? Granted, a group of 5 overthrowing an entire empire is that's a little tough, if not impossible, without allies. But if the party want to go that route, there are more than likely folks that also want to see the Thurian Empire overthrown and or replaced and or just completely eradicated. So Lloyd escapes the sewers and he goes to the ship that they are destined to sail on the next morning to get to Bleakbell. He finds his quarters and he begins to shave his face and his head, which is now why he looks like this, which, you know, if you don't know what that is, then you're obviously too young. That is one of the RuneScape avatars. His other one is the Dark Wizard version. I'm sure I've got a picture somewhere, but I'm not too worried about actually showing that. So anyway, so Lloyd does that. Gower ends up coming to talk to the rest of the group after he dismisses Lloyd, saying that they understand that Lloyd has escaped. They are searching high and low for him currently, and hopefully they find him. He then had the party explain what all had happened. So they all said that they were enchanted, they weren't able to act on their own will, and yada yada yada. Gower, there's no telling if he believed him or not, but he acted like he believed them. And then he asked specifically Dr. Thorpe and Trina where their magic came from, because he heard stories of how they fought the royal griffin as well as the child griffin and defeated both of them, killing one of them, making the other one flee the area. And Trina said that she had worshipped the goddesses known as the Morgan Collective, which Gower hadn't heard of or hadn't done enough research to know exactly who they are, but he has heard of them. And he said that they were a very, very small following, almost cultish in their beliefs. But they are a minor goddess, or goddesses, a group of minor goddesses. So technically, since they are her patron, it almost kind of works as a cleric in turn. Even though she's a warlock, it kind of works like a cleric because they are goddesses and they are bestowing their power upon her. So technically it is divine for the sake of flavor. Now, Dr. Thorpe, he gets his powers from a devil, being an Illrigger. But he says that he doesn't know exactly what god has bestowed his powers on him, but he hears their call, which Gower had given him the blue moon symbol. Is it yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a blue moon symbol for Mistra, and said that if he does need some sort of guidance, to call upon her and she should be able to help. He then left them. They went to the inn for the night and did a couple different random activities. Dr. Thorpe, I believe, almost got caught doing some reconnaissance and ended up having to sort of feign his ignorance that he had even been there, and that he had been friends with Lloyd because the guards were asking him questions. Trina was communing with her gods. Kai was looking around the location just to see what was going on, and Three-Toe Jim didn't really have anything that he was doing specifically, at least not that I remember. So that was the session 11 Confess. Session 12 was Sail to Bleakbell, and this was literally all taking place on the ship. Let's see. So Gower, we'll hide, or we'll bring this guy to light real quick. So essentially on this this one, it was all roleplay based. So the party, they embark on the ship, they get on the ship, they get shown their crew quarters, things like that. And on the ship with them as passengers are a pregnant woman and her son, a old woman, 2 barbarians, and this gentleman right here, Ricard. Now, the party didn't meet Ricard until they were about to set sail. The crew had asked them to stay in their quarters for about 25 minutes or so while they got everything set up and ready for them to take off. And when they were taking off, they were allowed to come topside. The bell rang, the crew called them up, and they came upstairs. And when they did, they noticed that Gower was talking to the captain and they and this gentleman right here, whose name is Ricard, a inquisitor who is undergoing his first assignment at Bleakbell. His goal is to figure out what is causing the madness that has been rumored to be infesting the minds of the people of Bleakbell. So this is his, he's a greenhorn. He's never really done a mission, especially not on his own. All he has is his training that he's gotten from the church and the Inquisition. He wears a metal mask on his face, which, from what he told, I believe it was either Lloyd or Trina asked him about it, or maybe it was Kai. The reason they wear the metal mask is so that they can forget their individuality and start to think as the Inquisition as a whole. Almost like a hive mind of humans, but it's definitely the Inquisition's brainwashing technique. I believe that the party ended up gathering, like, they're trying to get rid of your self-identity so that you only identify with the Inquisition, and that will help outline your goals to align with the Inquisition's only. Definitely a brainwashing technique for sure. But he's not here to be looking for Lloyd. It just so happens that Lloyd is on the same ship and Lloyd is a wanted man. and now there's an Inquisitor on the ship, and he's got to be extra careful, which is really funny because most of the role play that happened on the ship, everyone, instead of calling him Frederick, which was his code name, which is actually his familiar's name, instead of calling him Frederick, they called him Lloyd. And people caught on to that, and they're like, why do you call yourself Frederick, but they call you Lloyd? Are they your friends? Blah, blah, blah. And it put Lloyd in a very difficult situation because now he's got to like make up a new rumor or a new reason or a new white lie as to why he's Frederick and or Lloyd, or the fact that he doesn't know these people and they're just calling him something and he doesn't know why. A lot of other various RP happened, mainly with Ricard and like his seasickness and things like that. They talked with some of the crew about their trip to Bleakbell. They talked with the barbarians about how strong they were and how they challenged Three-Toe Jim to an arm wrestling match. So it was a very cut and dry, lots of talking. And the conversations were more of trying to develop the party bonds even stronger, especially because they've technically got 2 new members of the team, Three-Toe Jim and Kai. So they're trying to get to know each other and bond in that format. At the end of the session, though, the ship ended up coming into a storm. And in the storm, there were these torrents that popped in. Now these torrents, they were able to dodge a few of them, but ultimately they got caught. And when they got caught, grappling hooks came over the side and these big shark folks. So like this big great white shark humanoid, without the mermaid, of course. He didn't jump up there with a mermaid. And then these other sharks with large harpoons and hooks and stuff like that jumped up on the ship, saying that they've come for their share of the cargo, as well as some of the crew for sacrifice. In which Three-Toe Jim said, well, hold on, haven't you heard of Ligma? And they're like, Ligma? And they're like, Ligma balls. And he started the attack. Now, because they were stuck in a torrent, the group, the sailors, and the party and the sailors had taken out these large oars and were trying to essentially get the ship out of these torrents so that they could sail forward and just get out of harm's way. But obviously the sharks had a different idea. So battle ensued, but because the party started about mid-ship, right around here somewhere, and the sharks were on the back part of the ship, they had a lot of ground to cover. The sharks, on their turn, what they did was they pulled out these magic rings and they would put them on the fingers of the crew and they would have them toss themselves overboard. Now, the party has no idea what happened with this ring or why it worked or how it worked. But essentially, the ring... I gotta find the actual magic item because now Three-Toe Jim has one of these. And he's gonna end up finding out what it is. I'm pretty sure he used a short rest or a long... He used his time to identify what it was. And essentially it is I think it's called the Ring of the Deep. And it's when you put it on and you get submerged in water, your entire body essentially becomes the weight of an anchor and you will drop all the way to the bottom of the sea. Obviously these humans putting this ring on and jumping in the water and being essentially dragged to the very bottom are on their way to certain death. If they don't die from the cranial pressure that is exuded on their body, they will die from lack of oxygen, obviously. But the Sharkin do this because they need them for sacrifices, which after the battle, which was won, and it was won with Trina barely hanging on. She had 2 death saving throws failures after being hit while unconscious by this Sharkin right here. Had they not killed this guy on the very next turn, she would have been dead and making a new character. But luckily, she came out on top barely. but nonetheless, she came out on top. Then, at the very end of that combat, this gentleman right here, who, if you watched any of the campaign with the previous group of people, the Kingdoms of Boridil, you'll know that this is Dagon's Drowned, one of the chosen of Dagon that had essentially thwarted the party on their last seafaring adventure that party had gone on as they were going from the City of Guilds to Cyrodiil, and he had kidnapped Cyrene and Lacan. In theory, that session with Dagon's Drowned, the very first time I ever used him, like, it was a very, very, very close fight. He literally had, I think, like 3 or 4 HP left and needed just one hit of anything that dealt 4 or more damage. And I believe it came down to Kirsten's turn as Cyrene, and she was a druid. And instead of using a spell that would have done some guaranteed damage, like they have to make a saving throw or take half damage on a save, instead of doing that, she did an attack roll and she missed. She rolled a natural 1, which then he was able to go in and attack her and knock her unconscious and take them to be sacrifices for Dagon coming from the abyss. So that was the first encounter that I had thrown Dagon's Drowned at a party. This one was a social encounter that I threw him in, and essentially just giving them warning, saying, hey, we control these parts. Maybe the Empire doesn't know, or they don't even realize, or maybe they don't care. But perhaps you all could be messengers, and any ship that comes through this channel, they are going to need sacrifices for us. And that's going to be your goods and your crew that you're going to be sacrificing because we need them. And if you don't, we'll just take your whole ship. We almost took your whole ship this time, which that was one of the environmental hazards. The ship is stuck in a torrent. It can't move. And these large anchors had jumped up from the sea, crashed into the sides of the ship, and were starting to try to sink the ship. I gave the characters 5 turns to be able to remove the anchors before the ship had capsized, and I think they literally had 1 more turn left before it finally did enough damage to the ship to where it would have capsized and they would have been stranded. I don't know what would have happened if that were the case, but luckily Lloyd came out, I think, on his 2nd turn. No, it was like the 3rd turn of combat. He came out and said, you know what, screw it, because when they were fighting, he got a slow spell off on the big Sharkin, which the slow spell is really, really, really freaking good. It really disrupts the action economy for the enemy. And I think half of the enemies ended up being affected by it, and they were just failing their wisdom save. So they couldn't do their whole action and things like that, which had this Sharkin, the big boy, been able to do that, I'm almost certain Trina would have died this combat, because he would have dealt substantially more damage to the crew and to the party, but he was unable to do so. So good play on Lloyd to cast the slow spell. Once only, I think, the crew was affected by slow still, he dropped it and cast Levitate. Or no, he cast Animate Object. Which, does he have Levitate? I'm curious. He does. I think 1 creature or object of your choice. So he could have actually used the 2nd level spell instead of the 5th level spell that he did. He cast Animate Object on this anchor and started manipulating it and used it to get the other anchors out, which was really good. Really smart play. But Ricard saw him do this. Ricard noticed that he's a wizard, and Ricard knows that Gower is hunting one. So what's going to happen at the beginning of next session, you know, I don't know what the party's thoughts are. They know that Ricard is a part of the Inquisition. They know that he works directly for Gower, and they know that Gower is hunting Lloyd currently. So the end of the fight, The anchors are out, the torrents go away, and the ship begins sailing again. I think they only lost 4 or 5 crew members out of like the 12 that were going to be sacrificed. So not too heavy of a burden, but enough to where the crew's probably going to be sulking and not very happy. But either way, that was the end of this session, as it was all combat. And at the end of it, they met Dagon's Drown. He threatened the crew and said, if you come back this way, we will take what we're owed. Because a cargo ship, we don't normally anticipate there being mercenaries on board. So next time, if there are mercenaries, we'll make sure to bring more people. And if there aren't, well, I would go ahead and draw straws now, because half of you were coming with us. And that's where we ended the session, was him jumping in the water and skittering away into the deep ocean. And as the anchors had started to float back down to where their origins came, they saw a very large, dark shadow drifting away from the ship. And that is SHAAKS Part 13. Tomorrow will be Part 14. Probably going to call it like Welcome to Bleakbell, but essentially the party's going to get to Bleakbell, and they're going to be able to start looking for... Lloyd's looking for a rock that fell from the sky. Trina's looking for any reason that some war would start in this location, or maybe some call to arms that's happening based on what the goddesses say or have said. Three-Toe Jim is looking for one of his toes, and I don't think Kai has I don't think I've given Kai a reason to be here just yet. And Dr. Thorpe is pretty much doing his own backstory thing, but the party have no idea why he's exactly here. For all they know is that he's here to kind of just consult and not interrogate, that's not the right word, do therapy for them in some way, shape, or form. But anyway, those were the 3 sessions, or the 3 past sessions. There was a one-shot that we did, but I didn't want to really go and do a DM Diaries of that, because it's a one-shot. Doesn't truly pertain to... Well, no, it does, actually. But essentially what the one-shot was the evil characters were being introduced, and they were being introduced to a larger evil entity that this group hasn't met yet. So the players know who the porcelain lady is and somewhat what she may be capable of or what she's after. But she has essentially hired those evil characters to do her bidding. So in future one-shots that we do for evil characters, we will be going through their story of how they are manipulating events that trigger throughout the world as well. So that is sessions 11, 12, and 13. Thank you for coming out, and hopefully we see you tomorrow, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, for our next D&D session. And until then, we'll see ya. Peace!